Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. This is Miss Chin. Can you hear me well? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me, please? Please respond. Testing, testing here.
Yes, Miss, can hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Miss. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Wan Ting. Thank you, Jiswen. Okay. Before I move on, this is a quick announcement to make. In fact, it's a reminder. Reminder, next Thursday, we will have our midterm test. And it will be conducted during the lecture class. So therefore, there will be no lecture next week. I repeat, there will be no lecture next week. That is on week 7, Thursday, we won't have any lecture. We're going to take a midterm test. Right, and the time-wise is at 10, right, 10 a.m. to 11:30. For those who can't, for those who have class at 11, please, again, as I keep reminding, please let your tutor knows, or please let the lecturer knows that you have to sit for this exam. Okay, from 10 to 11:30 next Thursday. So you may be late to their classes. So that's what I have already highlighted here. That's the only available class or only available time the FGO can arrange for us. So no choice. Next one, please mark this down, IDK2. Right, so there your job is to be present in the correct venue. Ladies and gentlemen, please let me remind you, please be present in the assigned venue, which is at IDK2. Right, I will allow for those who were late to sit in, after 50 minutes, the class has started, the latest 20 minutes. After that, you will not allow to sit for the midterm test. Right, so try to come on time and also to the right venue, that is IDK2. Right, next lectures covered will be, this one is on lectures, what we have covered in the lecture itself, not the topic, not the textbook chapters. Okay, so not the textbook chapters or even the topic in the course syllabus. No, we don't follow the course syllabus. We don't follow the topics that is the chapter of the textbook. We follow the lectures. So we're going to cover lecture 1, 2, 4, and 5. Okay, so there are only four lectures being covered. Right, that is your advantages. Right, that is your advantages. You need to concentrate only on 4 lectures. Next, there will be 5 subjective questions, or you have to answer all. You have to answer all 5 subjective questions, all in the question paper. Right, and it will be 50-50. Okay, 50-50, 50 theory concept, 50 calculations. Okay, next, please, instructions to you all, ladies and gentlemen. You're not required to use your own answer pads or even A4 papers. Just answer in the question paper itself. Okay, since that we have paid for the fees, why not we use the resources of the Utah? Okay, so please answer in the question paper itself. And you are not allowed to bring in any unauthorized materials into the exam hall. And also, again, as I mentioned, be present. Try to be present. If let's say you can't, then you have to sit for replacement, which you may have to face some consequences later, or even if you are late, in the to the midterm test, also you will have to face consequences. Okay, if you are late to the midterm test, you have to face consequences. And as usual, right, we are asked to remind students the breach of exam. Please, you are a matured students, you are matured ladies and gentlemen here. You have sat for exams for many rounds already. Please do not let us caught you, right, doing something silly in the test. That really, very serious consequences. You will be barred for 2 semesters, and I'm sure you would like to graduate on time. Right? Do not do something silly. Do not let us catch you breaching the exam rules. Clear? Okay. Any question on the midterm test before I continue? Any questions on the midterm test? All right, so please be reminded, be present. Try to be present at the right venue. Not try, you have to, you must. And also try not to do something silly that actually cause you to be barred for 2 semesters. I'm sure you are actually in your year 3 now, and you would like to graduate on time. So do not do something silly or foolish that let us catch you on the spot, and you have to face the consequences very seriously. All right, come. So today we're going to start on the lecture 7. Lecture 7. So before I continue, why not I try to, where is the new, okay. So just a quick revision, just a quick recap what we have learned in the past. So in, I think lecture 3, we have covered the triangular arbitrage. Not lecture 3, lecture 4, lecture 3 we didn't cover at all. So we skipped lecture 3 altogether. So lecture 4, we have covered the first type of triangular arbitrage. Lecture 5, we have covered the rest of the arbitraging, that is the CIA and UIA, also the locational arbitrage. So that we have 3 arbitraging attempts. All right, so these are the 3 we have learned, 1, 2, and 3. To identify triangular arbitrage, we look for cross rate. Then check, see whether it's the same with the benchmark code or not. If let's say they're the same, then no triangular arbitrage. If it's not the same, this is possible. Triangular arbitrage possible. Then try to go identify what you need to do in these 3 corners here. Come to the second arbitraging attempt, that is the CIA and UIA. You will have to go draw something like a rectangular. Right, to allow CIA, you have to prove that the IRP does not hold. Your interest differential is not the same with the forward change. Okay, the change in the forward and the spot. So if they are the same, again, IRP holds, CIA not possible. Lastly, locational arbitrage is where we look into the bid and ask. Right, locational arbitrage, we look into the bid and ask. Where this rule is violated, the bid is more than ask, then locational arbitrage is possible. All right, so these are the 3 arbitraging attempts we have learned. In lecture 6, we have covered speculation. Right, we cover speculation, how we learned to become a speculator. And we have 3 forms of speculation as well. We have 3 forms, 3 arbitraging, 3 speculations attempts. Right there. First is the pure spot. Second is the forward market speculation. Third is the option speculation. So we have 1, 2, 3, 3 speculations attempt. Okay, so just repeat again, 3 arbitraging attempts, 3 speculations. Now come to lecture 7. Come to lecture 7, we are going to learn hedging. So how to hedge, how to become a hedger. Okay, and again, we will have 3 external hedging, which you have to master. Honestly, you have to master these 3 external hedges. That is using the forward market hedge. Second, money market hedge. Third, option market hedge. right? You will see that we have 1, 2, 3, 3 external hedges you have to master. And besides of the external, we have other forms that are the internal hedges. So you will see that there are a few more, 4 in fact. We have 4 internal hedges we are going to learn. Clear? So for lecture 7 today, we are going to become the hedger. Right, like I would say the arbitraging and also speculators, arbitraging and speculations, we seek profit more. But for hedging, we don't look for profit. Our purpose for hedging is not to profit, but to reduce risk. Okay? So that's what we have covered. So here we go, lecture 7. Okay, come, ladies and gentlemen. We shall cover lecture 7 today. That is about transaction exposure. In fact, we will have 3 types of exposure, 3 types. But in lecture 7, we concentrate on the first type, that is the transaction exposure. How to measure and then manage this type of exposure. We call it transaction exposure. Okay. So for this lecture, I have split it out to 4 parts. The first part, we try to understand what are the forms of forex exposures that an MNE may face. Right? What are the types of forex exposures that MNE may face? Part 2, we try to measure. Okay, so in case, I won't say in case, in fact, most of the MNE will need to know this, how to measure the exposure. Because by measuring the exposure, you will know how much is exposed, the amount exposed, the amount at risk. So when we know the amount, then only we can manage them well. So first, we have to learn how to measure the exposure first to come up with an appropriate amount to hedge. And then to manage them, that's where we use hedging to manage the exposure. Okay? And again, as I mentioned, lecture 7, we're going to concentrate on how to measure transaction exposure, the first type of exposure. Manage the transaction exposure through hedging. So the other 2 types of exposure, we're going to learn it in lecture 8. Right now, let's look into what is this forex exposure. Commonly, when we touch on exposure, it's like something negative, right? It seems like it's something negative to the MNE, right? In fact, in a way, we can say yes, right? Say yes. It's actually the probability for the company or for the MNE to incur loss, right? So that's what we will try to avoid exposure. In this subject, multinational finance, we focus on the forex exposure. Right? Forex exposure, in fact, is a measure of the potential for a firm's profitability or its net cash flow or even market value to change. Right? So here, MNEs, they are always concerned. How are their profit? How are their cash flows? How are their market values changed? Just because of a change in the exchange rates. That's why we focus on the forex. So any change in the forex, any change in the exchange rate, how would it affect the firm profitability? How will it affect the firm cash flow? How will it affect the firm value? That is what the MNE will have to focus on or concentrate or concern on. Okay. This word all M&E will not like this, the risk of loss. If let's say you know that you are going to enjoy some opportunities or some profit in the future, something positive in the future, you would not want to do any hedging. You will welcome them with open arms, correct? But only when there is a probability to incur losses, then that's where the M&E will have to be very careful, okay? Especially for Forex exposure, right? There is this risk of loss stemming from exposure because of unfavorable Forex movement. So because the Forex move in a direction where it's not profitable to you or it's not at your advantage, then it's likely to incur. An important task of the financial manager is, like I mentioned, first we have to measure first. We have to know how much is exposed, how much is at risk, the amount. So if we know the amount, you know, I would say to a certain degree that is comfortable, right? You know how much is exposed, then we can manage them efficiently, meaning you can reach or you can achieve a very high efficiency ratio. Right, so that's why first thing is we have to learn how to measure this exposure first. Then find ways, what are the most appropriate ways to manage this exposure. And the most commonly, we will try to use hedging, either externally or internal contracts. Types of Forex exposure, there, these three. So these are the three major forms of exposure M&E may face. First one, transaction exposure, and it's the most common exposure, and the most dominant exposure, in fact. And with that also, is the most easiest to measure. Right? Transaction exposure, in fact, to an M&E is the most easiest to measure and manage. The efficiency of hedging this transaction exposure is pretty high because for a simple reason, the amount is known. Right? The name tells all, is based on transaction. So when the company enter into a transaction, they will know how much is the transaction amount. So therefore, the amount is pretty known, pretty comfortable. And that's where it's much more easier to hedge, to manage this exposure. Right? Unlike operating exposure also known as economic or strategic exposure. This is the widest or the broadest type of exposure. It covers almost every transactions or every I would say that businesses, you know, or any kind of exposure to the M&E. Right? In fact, operating exposure, part of it actually from the transaction exposure. So transaction exposure is a subset to the operating exposure. I repeat, transaction exposure, in fact, is a subset to the operating exposure. So in short, operating exposure will have two parts. The first is the measurable portion, right? And the measurable portion will be from the transaction exposure because the amount is known. And the second part will be the non-measurable exposure. And this is not easily hedged. Anything out of the measurable one fall under the non-measurable, and this is not easy to hedge. Okay, that is the operating exposure. Right, the second exposure here is the translation exposure, also known as accounting exposure. This is the most, I would say that not so significant to the company. It's just by book base only. It's just by book base how it affected the M&Es. That's all. Try to look into each of these exposure in deep down. Come, the first one, transaction exposure. You will see that there are quite a lot of words here, right? Try to read together and see whether how far you can understand. Right? Measures changes. So again, transaction exposure measures changes in the value of outstanding financial obligations incurred prior to a change in the exchange rates, but not due to be settled until after the exchange rates change. Sounds like very complicated. Right? Sounds like very complicated and confusing, but anyhow, right, I will try to draw this up in a diagram to make things easier to understand. Come. Now, what happened is that for a transaction exposure, that's where in T0 here, at T0, a company enter into a contract. They sign a contract to commit to deliver something or obligated to deliver in the future time. I repeat, at T0 here, an M&E may contracted themselves, to deliver or to buy or to sell, to export or to import, to borrow or to lend, right, at T0 here. And the commitment, the settlement, right, this settlement, in fact, will be at a future time, that is at TT. So only at the settlement date, maturity date, then the company has to settle. That's where it's contractual based, contracted. There will be a contract, right? There will be a contract indicating how much the M&E has to pay or receive in the future, right? And at maturity, only then they need to settle. Let's look into it deep down again. So at T0 here, an M&E actually contracted itself to a future obligation, right? For example, they need to pay in a foreign currency in future time. We call this a foreign currency payables. So come at the maturity, that is at time T here, they have to settle these payables in foreign currency. That is to pay in foreign currency. Right, now, what happened is that if let's say today, right, T0, the M&E actually contracted itself to pay in foreign currency in time T. So this is known. And what happened is that how much is the foreign currency amount you have to pay in time T when you need to settle. So when you need to settle these foreign currency payables at time T here, that's where you have to settle in foreign currency. Now, the major problem to the M&E is that how much is this foreign currency amount in the home currency term? Right, I repeat, how much is this foreign currency amount in the home currency term? So how much home currency the company has to fork out to buy this foreign currency to make this payment? That is at a future time. And to know how much the company has to fork out in the home currency to buy this foreign currency at time T, we need this. What is the spot rate then? What is the spot rate at the time when you need to buy this foreign currency to settle this contractual obligation? Okay, so the problem comes here, arise from here. If let's say there's no change in the exchange rate, meaning no change in exchange rate. So the ST here will be the same with the before. That is the current spot. Then we know that the home currency amount that you have to pay will be the same with this. The problem is that what if let's say there's a change? There's a change in the exchange rate during this time period. There's a change in the exchange rate there. So my ST here is not the same with the S0. So that how much I have to fork out in my home currency here to make these foreign currency payables. So in this case, in the middle of the period here or any day before you have to settle here, there's a change in the exchange rate. Right, so in this case, you will have to ask how much I have to fork out in the home currency to buy this foreign currency to make the payment because of the change in the exchange rate. Clear? Right, so let's look into the statement again. So transaction exposure arises, right, when a change in the value of the outstanding financial obligation. So in T0 here, you enter into a financial obligation. You enter into an obligation which you need to settle in the future, right? And this obligation is enter or incur prior to a change in the exchange rate. So you enter into this obligation prior to the change of the exchange rate. But you have to settle only after the change, then settle after the change. So that's what transaction exposure tells. Okay. Next, transaction exposure deals with real cash flows. So in other words, it leads to a loss, a real cash loss. If let's say the exchange rate here moves to an unfavorable direction. So the company will have to face real cash loss. If let's say the ST here change unfavorably to the MNE. Okay, that's the transaction exposure. Come, translation exposure is pretty simple, right? In a way that we just have to think how the company or how an MNE, right, do translation to come up with the consolidated financial statements. Try. So I come up with this illustration, a diagram. For example, we have a parent company in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, of course, the currency involved is ringgit. Right, what happened of this group or this company? Right, they have foreign subsidy. You see that I have already highlighted here or put in here. We have foreign subsidy 1, foreign subsidy 2, foreign subsidy 3, and many others. And each of these foreign subsidiary, they are from different countries. Right, one is from France, one is from China, one is from Indonesia, and many other countries. And of course, all these foreign subsidiaries, they will actually state their financial statements. They will have to state their financial statements in their own local currency. So the foreign subsidiary will have to report the financial statements in their own local currency. Right? What happened is that when the parent here needs to come up with the consolidated financial statements, which is in RM, they have to go and convert all these reports into Malaysia ringgit. And that gives rise to the translation exposure. Okay, try now. So the potential for accounting derived changes in the income and the owner's equity. So income will be the P&L, right, the profit and loss account or the income statement. The owner's equity, that will be the balance sheet. So it actually go and affect the income, that is the P&L, and also the balance sheet figures. And this translation exposure will occur because of the need to translate the financial statements of the foreign subsidiary, which are a foreign currency, to the parent co. The parent co is in home currency RM. But all these foreign subsidiaries, their financial statements are in local currency, which are foreign currency to the parent co. So when the foreign currency need to report and prepare a worldwide consolidated financial statements, they have to translate all these financial statements in their own local currencies to one single reporting currency. That is where translation exposure occur. And this is one exhibit from the textbook. It explains all. Right, you can see that all these are the financial statements, right, and the subsidies. These are the subsidies to Trident. Right, this is the Trident group of company, the parent co. And of course, they have a domestic company in US as well, which is in dollar. So there is no translation exposure here because conversion from dollar to dollar, there's nothing much. The only translation exposure will occur when they have to translate the Trident in China and the Trident in Europe financial statements back to the parent co currency to come up with the consolidation. Okay, that's what translation exposure is about. The last one will be the operating exposure, also known as the economic exposure or strategic exposure. Again, it measures changes. Right? If you see that from all this while, from the very first explanation on the transaction exposure, we have this: measure the changes, measure the changes, measure the changes. Right? M&E or businesses, they don't like too much changes. They don't like too much changes. Right? Changes to what they expected, changes to what they predicted. Right? They don't prefer those. So that's where, if let's say any event that gives rise to changes, then again, they have to be very mindful. So again, operating exposure, also known as economic exposure or strategic exposure, measure changes in the present value of the firm resulting from any change in the future, blah, 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 blah. Well, again, all these are quite confusing in words. So let's see. I draw up this. So we look into this one, the present value of the firm. So to come up with the present value of the firm, we look into the future cash flows and we do discounting. Right, we do discounting, and that will bring us to the present value of the firm. Okay. For operating exposure to arise, that's where any change in the exchange rate that bring upon a change in these future cash flows. So I repeat, any change in the exchange rate that bring upon changes to these futures cash flows. Of course, directly it will affect the present value of the firm, because the future cash flow changed, the present value of the firm will change accordingly. All right, so that's what it says. Operating exposure measures the changes in the present value of the firm. Changes in the present value of the firm resulting from any change in the future cash flows here, right? Caused by an unexpected change in the exchange rates. Okay, and part of this cash flow, as I've mentioned earlier, is part of transaction exposure as well. So transaction exposure actually falls under one of these. Actually is part of this as well. The only non-measurable part also are involved. So therefore, the operating exposure here is not easy to hedge because these cash flow streams are not easy to estimate. That is actually the cash flows of the company or M&E into the future. So this is not easy to estimate. This is not easy to come up with this cash flow stream. So therefore, it's not easy to measure operating exposure, how much are actually exposed, the amount. It's very difficult to come up with a comfortable amount. Okay, so therefore, it's not easy to hedge. The change in the value depends on the effect of the exchange rate change on this one, future sales volume, future prices, future costs. So anything that happened to the future sales volume, the prices, the cost, this will give rise to a change in the cash flows here. And automatically, it will give rise to a change in the present value of the firm. Right? We will always look into operating exposure as to how competitiveness of a firm is affected in the future. The competitiveness of the firm is affected in the future, and it will affect these cash flows. Once these cash flows are affected, the present value affected, operating exposure exists. Clear? Okay, next, let's look into some differences. What are the differences between the transaction exposure and operating exposure? So what are the differences between these two? In fact, let's look into the similarity first. The similarity is that both of them actually exist or arise because of a change in exchange rate. Okay, both. In fact, all three exposures arise because of the change in the exchange rate. But more to the transaction and operating exposure, this exchange rate change will affect this one, the future cash flow. So the similarity between these two exposure is that how the value of a firm will be affected, or the future cash flows of the firm will be affected because of the change in the exchange rate. We look into the future. Unlike translation exposure, translation exposure touches on financial statements. Financial statements are historical data. It's the past transactions. They don't look into future cash flows. Translation exposure looks into financial statements which are already past. So therefore, it's not counted into the future. Right? But transaction and operating exposure, they look into the future cash flows and how these future cash flows will be affected because of a change in the exchange rate. Clear? right? So the difference between the two, we have already covered the similarity, right? The difference now is that one is this already contracted for, meaning you know the amount you contracted to pay, you contracted to receive in a foreign currency, and therefore you know the amount you already contract to carry out this, so you know the amount. So transaction exposure concerned with future cash flows already contracted for, so therefore this is easily hedged. So you can hedge this with a very high efficiency, in fact, because you know the amount. But for operating exposure, you can see that there is a non-measurable component in there. There's a non-measurable component in there, and therefore it's not easy to be hedged. Right? Operating exposure focus on expected only, but not yet contracted for. Aside of the transaction exposure, which is measurable, there are this non-measurable portion that is not yet contracted for. So therefore, the amount is not known. It's not known for sure how much is actually exposed under the non-measurable. Right? And again, it touches on future cash flows. And this non-measurable amount, right, also actually affected by the change in the exchange rate. Okay, therefore it's not easy to hedge operating exposure. It's not easy to hedge. So I repeat, transaction and operating exposure, right, they involve future cash flows, and it takes on what are the changes in the exchange rate that will affect these cash flows that is committed or obligated to be delivered in the future. The difference between the two is that one is already contracted for, meaning you sign a contract, you know how much you have to pay or receive in the future in that currency. So that is the transaction exposure. But for operating exposure, part of the cash flow is non-measurable, and therefore it's not easy, that is yet to contract for. So it's not easy to hedge. And this is actually from the competitiveness of the company. Right? And we don't know how the company is going to perform in the future, how the degree of the competitiveness of the M&E will be affected in the future. We don't know. So it's difficult to come up with the amount. So it's not easy to manage operating exposure. That's all I'm trying to say. Now we concentrate on the transaction exposure. How do we measure? How do we measure transaction exposure? All right, let's try again. What are transaction exposures? Transaction exposure gives rise to gains or losses that arise from the settlement of existing financial obligations whose terms are stated in foreign currency. You see that for transaction exposure to occur or to exist, that's where your obligation must be in foreign currency. That is either to pay in the foreign currency or to receive in foreign currency, but in a future time. So you're committed to pay foreign currency in the future time. We call it foreign currency payables. And if you commit to receive a foreign currency in the future time, we call it foreign currency receivables. Clear? Now, the most common examples of transaction exposure. So these are just examples. We have yet to hedge. So we have yet to hedge. We just have to come up with the amount, how to measure the transaction exposure. We have yet to hedge. So we try to understand how to measure the transaction exposure first. And from these few examples, we can see that how transaction exposure can occur. Right, the first one is this, purchasing or selling on credit. So meaning to say it's not cash on delivery. Cash on delivery is pretty simple. Right? I exchange the goods with cash instantly on the spot or 2 days or within 2 business days. That is the cash on delivery. So one hand we swap the goods with the cash. So easily we can settle it because S0 is known. Right. The concern is that what if, let's say, you buy and sell on credit, you purchase or sell in credit, you import and export, on credit terms. where your settlement must be in a foreign currency. When you purchase, that's where you are going to buy, and therefore you will incur to pay. So you will incur a foreign currency payable here. Whereas when you do selling, right, on credit, that is to export. When you do export on credit, that's where you will actually give rise to a foreign currency receivables. Okay, so these are just buying and selling on credit, but must be in the form of foreign currency settlement. Right, another typical example of transaction exposure is the borrowing and lending, but the amount or the denomination has to be in foreign currency. Okay, so the borrowing and lending activities of the firm where the repayment or the settlement has to be in the foreign currency. Right, the third example, the third common examples or the activities a company may take that exposed to transaction exposure is this. They take position in the derivatives. For example, like taking a position in a forward contract where you are obligated to buy or sell a foreign currency in the future. The last one is that when you do some acquisition of fixed assets, where it must be settled in foreign currencies again. Right, so in short, you will see all these coming in the picture, foreign currency. Right, the key to identify transaction exposure is it must involve foreign currency settlement. Okay, I repeat, the key to identify transaction exposure is whether that activities or that transaction involve foreign currency or not. If yes, transaction exposure occur. Right, so let's look into these few examples. In fact, there are many more. There are many more activities that bring upon the transaction exposure, but these are just a few common, very commonly, and many will have to carry this out, and that's where it exposes the company to the transaction exposure. Let's look into first example. That is the purchasing or selling on credit. Right? Export and import on credit now. And the settlement, again, as I mentioned, settlement must be in foreign currency. Transaction exposure occur. Try now. So from your textbook, you always see this example, Trident. Right, from the textbook, we look into Trident, which is a US firm. So to a US firm, obviously, the home currency would be in dollar. Right, and Trident actually sells merchandise on credit to a Belgian buyer here. And this is in fact an export because Trident from a US go and sell it to a Belgium. Okay, so this is an export. That's where it will involve an amount of 1.8 million, but in euro. Okay, and I repeat. So what happened is that Trident sells merchandise on credit to a Belgian buyer here for 1.8 million euro. You see, the home currency to Trident is dollar, but what they actually incur is euro. In fact, they are selling. So when they're selling, they will expect to receive. And what they're going to receive is in euro. So they're incurring a foreign currency here, which is in euro of a receivable. So it's a foreign currency receivable here. Of this amount, 1.8 million in euro. When is it due? When is it due? Meaning when will Trident expect to receive this 1.8 million euro? That will be in 60 days time. So that's what we call it as the credit. So Trident actually allows this Belgian buyer to pay within 60 days time. So in fact, Trident expect to receive only this amount in 60 days time. Clear? All right, so that's what the picture is telling, right? And they are involving a foreign currency, euro. And this is in fact a foreign currency receivables. The spot exchange rate on the date of sale is given. So S0 is given. So S0, current spot is given. So how will transaction exposure occur? How will transaction exposure occur to Trident? Let's give it a try now. So this is what we have. At T0 here, right, Trident actually contracted itself to receive 1.8 million euro in 60 days. Right, so there, this is the amount they contracted, obligated to receive in a foreign currency. And when do they expect to receive this? That will be in 60 days time. So what happens is that only in 60 days time, they will receive exactly this 1.8 million. They won't receive this 1.8 million euro now. No, you won't receive it. You can only receive it, or you will only receive it in 60 days time when the contract matures, that you receive or you expect to receive this amount, 1.8 million euro in 60 days time. So one look at the spot rate here, one look at this current spot, right? I will expect that this amount, this export, in fact, will be equivalent to my home currency in dollar, 2.016 million. So my home currency value from this export, right, I will expect it to be in my home currency of this amount. That is my expected value from this export. Clear? That is T0. Now, what happened is that come 60 days here, you ask your customer to pay you 1.8 million euro. Of course, you will receive exactly this amount in that currency, right? Not a single cent more, not a single cent less. So you ask your customer to pay you 1.8 million euro. Of course, in 60 days time, you will receive 1.8 million euro exactly. Not a single cent more, not a single cent less, unless you give them a discount. Right, but in this case, we do not, and you're going to receive exactly this amount, what you ask them to pay. Next, so when you receive this euro, it's not your currency. When you receive this amount of euro, it's not your currency. Therefore, you have to convert it, you have to exchange it by selling your euro you receive at the prevailing spot rate here to convert or to exchange it back to your dollar. Now, the big question is how much in dollar, in fact, you can enjoy from this sale of 1.8 million euro in 60 days time. That's where it depends on this. What is the spot rate in 60 days time? Right? If let's say there's no change, let's say there's no change in the exchange rate. So my future spot here is the same with my current spot is the same. That is 1.12. Then you will expect to receive exactly the same. When you receive this 1.8 million euro, then sell it at this rate, you will receive this. So you will see that it's exactly the same with what you expected. You receive exactly what you have expected. Then no transaction exposure occur because there's no change in the exchange rate. But what happened is that, what if let's say now there's a change in the exchange rate? So if let's say there's a change in the exchange rate, then my future spot here at the time of settlement is not the same with the previous or the time when I enter into this transaction. It's not the same. So therefore, your amount you're going to receive here is not what you expected. It's not exactly what you expected. It can be less than what you have expected. It can be more than what you expected. So you will incur a loss on sale here. Enjoy a gain on loss here, depending on how your exchange rate changes. Clear? That is the transaction exposure. Okay? So Trident expects to exchange the euros received for this amount in dollar, right, when the payment is received. The transaction exposure arises because of the risk that Trident will receive other than what expected. So that is transaction exposure. You will receive something that is not what you expected. That will give rise to transaction exposure. This is example number 1. Let's look into what if, let's say now, we have some exchange rate here. Right, give an exchange rate here. 60 days later, you will receive exactly the same of 1.8 million euro. There, you will receive 1.8 million euro from your customer, from the Belgian buyer here. And you will sell this 1.8 million euro at the prevailing spot rate here, which is this one. So if let's say the spot rate is 60 day times is in 60 days time is $1.11 for every euro. So you will receive only this amount, 1.998 million in dollar. So are they the same? In fact, you receive lesser than what you expected. You receive lesser than what you expected because of a change in exchange rate from this to this. And in this case, it's not favorable to you because the exchange rate changed to the direction where it forced you to receive lesser in your home currency. Trader will receive only 1.998 million in dollar versus what they have expected earlier. So now trader have to suffer loss on sale, real cash loss by $18,000. Okay, so far, can you follow? Now, a simple way to understand whether it's a loss or gain made, right? A simple way to understand whether it's a loss or gain made. Let's see. So from my S0 here to a future, right? My euro here change in value. My currency B, that is the euro change in value. And in this case, my euro actually drop or depreciate in value. Right? Relatively, the dollar appreciates in value. This is what we can see from the exchange rate. Now, let's try to play some logic. What actually you are receiving is in euro. So in 60 days time, you're going to receive euro. And when you sell this euro, you are forced to sell it at a cheaper price of euro. So therefore, you will receive lesser in your home currency term. You suffer a loss. If let's say now the spot rate is 1.3. So now if let's say now I put it that the exchange rate to change to 1.3. So in this case, you will see that the euro actually appreciated. And you're going to receive the euro and sell your euro at a higher price, more valuable price, and therefore you will receive more. Enjoy a gain on sale. Okay? Any questions so far? Let's try the second example. So we have touched on the first example, how to measure, right? How to measure the transaction exposure. Come. Second example, borrowing or lending activities, right? Where your repayment is to be made in a foreign currency. You see, foreign currency must appear in the transaction, right? In mid-December 1994, a Mexican company had a US dollar debt. This is about a Mexican firm. A Mexican firm, their currency is peso. Right, to a Mexican firm, their currency is peso. And what do they have is actually a US dollar debt. So in fact, they involve a dollar debt here. Foreign currency is in dollar. So at that time, the peso was traded at 3.45 peso for every $1. But anyhow, something actually happened in Mexico. Comes 1995, they enter into the contract in 1994. So come 1995 here, in fact, the exchange rate moved, right? They allow the peso to float because of economic and political events within Mexico. And the exchange rate changed from this to this. So there's a change in the exchange rate. How does it affect this Mexican company dollar debt here? Right, let's try. So dollar debt in the mid-December, right? If I calculate it in my home currency wise, I take this one at the spot rate, then you will get this. But then when the exchange rate changes to this in January, that is in January here, you will see that the peso amount, that is the home currency value of your dollar debt, increases to this. Your dollar debt increases to this amount. So there's an increase in burden in your home currency wise by 541 billion, 541.2 billion in peso, just because of a change in the exchange rate. Let's try to look into the picture again. How did my spot rate change? How does the exchange rate changes? You can see that the dollar here appreciated within this period, right? And you have a borrowing. You have a borrowing in dollar. So therefore, you have to repay in dollar form. So therefore, you see that your burden will increase. Your burden will increase. Example, what if, let's say, they take a position in the derivatives? So taking position, right, for specific example here, a forward contract to buy or to sell a foreign currency. Believing that yen will weaken, so earlier on, Gary speculated that the yen to drop, to weaken in 3 months' time. So in 90 days, he expected yen to weaken. So therefore, he went into a position to sell yen forward. So he locked himself to sell yen under the forward contract at T0. But in fact, come settlement time, right, the yen does not depreciate. In fact, appreciate, strengthens. This is against its speculation. This is against his expectation. So therefore, definitely, he will incur a loss. But no choice, because Gary actually committed himself to sell yen forward. He must deliver this. He must, or he is obligated to deliver this obligation to sell yen. All right, and you sell yen at the price where the yen was low, that is at the forward price here, locked to sell at the forward price here. And he can't sell it at the spot, which actually is strengthening. So that's where he incur a loss. Right? In fact, he can sell it higher in the spot, but the problem now is that he can't. He actually entered into a forward contract that locked to sell yen at that price already, at the price. Right? Come T settlement time here, he has to sell it at this price, no choice. Even though the price in yen, the price of yen in the market is higher, he can't actually sell it in the market, but forced to sell it cheap under the forward. So that's where he incur a loss. Clear? The reason why is the loss is that because of a change in the exchange rate. If let's say there's no change in the exchange rate, then Gary will have no gain, no loss. But because of these changes, there, Gary actually incur a loss. Any questions so far? Any questions so far from the floor before I continue? Any questions so far? At this point of time, we have not touched on the hedging yet. No hedging activities coming, you know, I won't say coming lah. We have not covered the hedging part yet. No, we just try to understand what are the forms of transaction exposure. Thank you. Right, so far we just cover what are the forms of transaction exposure, that's all. We try to measure them, how much is the amount exposed and how we are going to be hurt if let's say there's a change in the exchange rate. That's what we were looking at in the past 1 hour. Okay, so we have yet to do any hedging. We have not touched on hedging yet, how to manage the exposure. All right, so can I continue then? Come, a few more slides before we take a break. Right, so now we look into hedging. So once we have measured, we know that there's a transaction exposure to be incurred. then we try to go for hedging to reduce this exposure. Why hedge? And try to understand what are the views on these hedging activities. Some say good, some say bad. Some say that no, hedging is not good. Some say that, oh, it's best to go for hedging. So why are these different views, and what are these views on hedging? Clear? So first we start with this one. Why hedge? Why hedge? Right, M&E possess a multitude of cash flows, meaning they have a number of foreign cash flows involved, and the size also is not the same. It can be high, it can be small, it can be large, right? So it possess a multitude of cash flows in foreign currencies, especially, right? And the size of these foreign currencies is not the same. Some are smaller, some are larger, right? And that's where it's very sensitive to any change in the exchange rate. So any change in the exchange rate, it will bring upon the amount of this foreign currency in the home currency wise, because you have to go and convert it to the home currency. See how much actually it value in the home currency term. Right, so that's where any change in the exchange rate is very sensitive to M&E. Right, this is the first one, exchange rate change. Another factor M&E always look into is the change in the interest rate. Right, the change in the interest rate also, right, the M&E will have to be very mindful. That one we leave it to later lecture. I think lecture 9 or lecture 10, we're going to cover that. How to manage interest rate risk. Okay, so now, so why M&E, have to hedge is that because of the cash flows they involve, mainly foreign currency, and their sizes, are ranges from small to large. So this leads to the growing field of financial risk management. So therefore, that's how they go and manage the currency exposures through hedging. So what is in fact hedging? I'm sure you have learned by now what is hedging. Hedging is taking the position, taking a position in an asset, right? That is your spot. You're going to take a position in your spot, either long or short in your spot here. And together with this, you are going to involve a contract as well. That is your derivative. Okay, so you also involve a contract here as well, where you long or short here. So that's where you have to take position in both of these markets. So hedging, in fact, is the taking of a position in an asset and also a contract in the form of derivative. Right? And how it works is that when your position in your asset here, it rises, then it will offset a fall in the value of your contract. So in other words, right, another side of the hand is that any fall in the value of your asset here, you will enjoy a rise in the value of your derivative contract here. So make it simple. In your spot, if let's say you enjoy a gain, it will be eliminated by the loss from your contract or derivative. Any loss you incur from the asset here because of a change in prices of the underlying asset here, then you will see that your contract or your derivative here will give you a gain to offset the loss you made in the asset. So that's where the hedging comes into this. Any gain you enjoy from the asset, it will be eliminated by the loss you have to incur in the derivatives or your hedge contracts. Any gain, vice versa. Right? Okay, so that's hedging. So while hedging can protect the owner of an asset from a loss, it eliminates any gain you can enjoy from the spot. That's the bad thing. Hedging is a two-pointed knife. That's what I kept saying, two-pointed knives. Right, the value of a firm is the present value of all expected future cash flows. So the fact that these cash flows are expected only, right? Emphasize that nothing in the future is certain. Nothing in the future is certain because these cash flows are expected only. Right, and that's where you see that most of the company, they would like to hedge to reduce some of this variance in the value of the future expected cash flows. So they want to reduce the risk that the future expected cash flows will not be too far from what they expected. That is the variance. Right, so in fact, variance look into the risk. Right, a firm that hedges reduces some risk in the value of the future's expected cash flows, meaning to say it will bring your expected cash flow closer to you, or okay, put it this way, when a company hedges, in fact, it will actually bring the realized cash flows to nearer, closer to what is expected. Right, so that's what hedging. Don't worry, later you see a graph or a diagram that show this. So currency risk is the variance in unexpected cash flows arising from unexpected exchange rate change. So any change in the exchange rate, it will give rise to the change in the expected cash flows. Right, so any change in the exchange rate, it will give rise to the change in the expected cash flows. That is the currency risk. Now, let's see. This is what I meant on the second statement here. It brings your realized cash flows nearer to what you expected. That is hedging. Okay, try now. So hedging narrows the distribution of cash flows about the mean of the distribution. Currency hedging reduces risk. Let's see. This is the graph. Now, if I look into those unhedged, this is your expected value. You see, this is your expected value. So if you unhedge, you will see that the variance is quite large, right? Meaning to say your expected value, let's say is roughly about 5 million from the transaction. But if you do not hedge, it can be quite far. Your realized gain, your realized cash flow here may be somewhere around the variance or the changes to the expected value here, maybe 2 to 3 million. Right, the difference from what you expected, it may be very huge, very far. But let's say if you hedge, it will bring closer to what you expected. I repeat, right? This is your expected value. Right? If you do not hedge, you will see that your realized value may be very far from what you expected. It can fall within this, any of these. Right? But if you hedge, it will bring closer to your expected value. So that is what hedging does. Okay? There. Right, so in fact, reduction in risk is not, however, the same with adding value. I repeat, reduction in risk is not, however, the same as adding value. No, in fact, no. Right, your expected value will still remain at this. Right, example, 5 million here. This is your expected value. It will remain at 5 million. There's no added value when you do hedging. In fact, not in the real cash, right? You will not actually see much difference. They do not add value to the transaction. In fact, it's just reduce the risk that it will change lesser. That's all. Okay? Right. To add value, you have to push the line here to your right. Then it's adding value. So, but hedging, no. Hedging is just to bring whatever that is going to realize closer to your expected value only. Okay, I hope you can get an understanding on this. So views on hedging. Well, some say good, some say bad. These are the part that say, no, hedging is no good. I oppose to hedging. Right? All these are arguments saying that hedging is no good. The next one is they say, yes, hedging is good. Proponents, they support hedging. This is against hedging. Clear? Right, so this is those group of people that against hedging. This is the group of people that favorite hedging. Okay, we will just go through pretty fast from here. So opponents of the hedging argue that shareholders are much more capable of diversifying currency risk. So they argue saying that I'm better in diversification than the management. So please do not diversify the cash flow for me. Pass Next, they argue that the hedging, right? The hedging does not add value, does not increase the expected cash flows. It just reduce the variance, reduce the risk that your expected value will change by higher degree. That is what the opponents argue. It does not add value. In fact, it does not increase the expected cash flows with hedging. Hedging activities can benefit management at the expense of shareholders. Some, yes, because hedging has a cost, right? Like options, they have to pay premium. Futures, they have to pay margin. So therefore, the management uses hedges, right? And they will actually incur extra costs. And this is only to benefit the management, but not at the shareholders. So there will be agency conflict. Next, management's motivation to reduce the variability. Right? Management's motivation to hedge may be driven by some accounting reasons. They just want to show a better results. They just want to show a good blue or black results in the book. That's where they went for hedging. And again, hedging at cost. Like options, you have to incur premium. Futures, we have to incur margins. So those group of people that favorite hedging cite that or say that this reduction in risk of future cash flows improves planning. Yes, when I do hedging, I know how much I am going to receive or pay in the future, right? Therefore, it actually helps to improve cash flow planning for the company. Next, it reduces the likelihood that the firm's cash flow will fall below a level. So that is a minimum point where the cash flows can fall. Right? With hedging, we know already how much you are going to pay or receive. You're not going to receive more than that or pay more than that. Okay, so that's where there is this hedging that helps the company to control the cash flow level. Next, management has a comparative advantage in knowing the actual currency risk of the firm. We call this asymmetric information. Right? Management has better information, has better knowledge, right? How to manage the risk better than the shareholders. Management is in the better position than the shareholders to recognize any disequilibrium in the market and then take advantage to enhance firm value through a selective hedging. Because again, same concept, there is asymmetric information. Management knows the best of the company's performance and they can take position better than the shareholders when they do diversification. All right, any questions so far up to this point? Right, we are done with all the measurement of transaction exposure. Right, why certain people say good is hedge, why certain group of people say that no, it's not good to hedge. So we have done up to that. Any questions so far? Moving forward or moving the next few slides, we are going to go for hedging. Please, any questions so far? Any questions so far? All right, if no, then we'll take a break. We will come back. What's the time now? We'll come back in 10 minutes time, probably 9:55. Okay, so we'll take a break and then we'll resume at 9:55. Okay, welcome back. Right, so let's continue with our lecture 7, and we're going to cover hedging techniques, managing transaction exposure. Try now. So we can manage forex exposure. We can actually manage forex exposure via this contractual, operating, and financial hedges. So we have three, I would say, three designs of hedges, but we will concentrate only on the first two. Right, so what are contractual and operating hedges? Let's see. So the main contractual hedges, also known as external hedges. So external means that we're going to involve some external contracts, derivatives to hedge. Okay, so you see that we're going to employ forward contract, futures, money market, options. So all these are external contracts to a company. So yeah, we call it external hedges, and they involve contracts, contractual. The second hedge technique is operating. Operating hedges utilize operating cash flows, meaning they will do the internal hedges, so also known as internal hedges for operating hedge. Contractual, external hedges. Right, so another name for the operating hedge, we call it internal. Some actually refer it as the natural hedge. Okay, internal, natural, operating hedge, they refer to the same. Right, and operating hedges utilize whatever the company, right, have internally first, then only they will go for external. So very commonly, very often, that M&E will apply this first. They will apply operating hedge or internal hedge or natural hedge first before they go for external hedges, because external hedges will cost money. So what the company will do is normally they will carry out operating hedges first. Then only the rest that they can't actually hedge internally, they will go for external hedging. Right, example of operating hedges or internal hedges are like risk sharing agreements, netting or matching, leads and lag in payment, and also pricing policy. So this is what they can do internally first before they engage external contracts to hedge. Lastly, they can cover some financial hedges here with swap. Right, they can actually use swap, okay, to reduce the hedge. But for multinational finance, we are not going to concentrate on this. We're not going to concentrate on this. We concentrate on the external hedge and the internal hedge. Okay, right? We start with the external hedge first. We start with the external hedges using derivatives like forward contract, option. Another one market that we apply to do hedging is the money market. Now, let's try. Let's try to give it a hand on how to do hedging. Looking into Trident again, the case of Trident. Right, Trident has just secured a sale. Is a sale of a generator to a British firm. Right, we know by now Trident is from US. The home currency to Trident is in dollar. And what happened is that Trident contracted to sell generator to UK firm, British firm, right? And the amount involved is 1 million in pounds. Right, Trident actually apply dollar because this is their home currency, whereas this transaction involved 1 million pounds, which is not in dollar. So obviously, they are involving a foreign currency in this transaction. And the amount exposed is 1 million pounds. Right, in this case, since that they are actually selling, meaning it's an export, so and this settlement will be in 90 days time. The settlement for this export by the UK or by the British firm is in 90 days. So Trident in fact created a foreign currency receivables. where he expects to receive in 90 days time 1 million in pounds. Okay, that's what Trident has contracted itself today. In 90 days time, he expects to receive 1 million pounds. Okay, next. So given the current spot between the dollar and pounds, and then with this current spot, right, what actually Trident can see is that if let's say there's no change in the exchange rate between today and 90 days later, they will expect to receive this amount in dollar. Because come 90 days time, when they receive this 1 million pounds, they will have to sell this 1 million pounds at the prevailing spot rate. And if let's say there's no change in the exchange rate, the future spot will be the same as of current spot here. And this is what they will receive in dollar when they sell this 1 million pounds. Right, exactly the same as of what they expected if let's say there's no change in the exchange rate. However, in the future, nothing is certain. Nothing is certain that there is no change in the exchange rate. So what the company can do is they have 4 alternatives here. Right? They can choose to remain unhedged, meaning they do not want to do any hedging. Just wait until 90 days later, receive this 1 million pounds, then sell it at that prevailing spot rate. That is remain unhedged. But if let's say the company wants to hedge, if they want to hedge, then they have to consider, should I go for forward? Should I go for money market? Should I go for option market? And all this hedging, they have to enter, they have to commit at T0 when they actually sign for this contract, right? Enter into this transaction. Today, they will have to go for a forward market hedge, money market hedge, or an option market hedge. Okay, now try now. What if let's say the company chose to remain unhedged, meaning they're not going to hedge at all using any contracts or whatsoever. They wait until 90 days later, receive this 1 million pounds from the UK firm, and then sell this 1 million pounds in 90 days time when they receive it at the spot rate, at that prevailing spot rate. Right, the problem is, what is this in the future? What is the spot rate in 90 days time? That is the risk they have to take if they choose to remain unhedged. Right, Maria may decide to accept the transaction risk. Hence, she chose not to take position in the hedging. Let's see what happened if there's no exchange rate movement, meaning no change. No exchange rate change. So definitely they're going to receive this as of what they expected. This is what they expected if let's say there's no change. The thing is that if let's say there is a change in the exchange rate from S0 of this to this one. But if the spot rate 90 days later turns to become $1.78 for every 1 pound, or this, it can change to either this one or this. Because it's uncertain, it can go up or it can go down in pounds. Come. So what happens if let's say come 90 days time, right, and the exchange rate rises to this, meaning 1 pound actually rises in 90 days time to $1.78 from $1.74 here. So what would be Trident going to face? The receivable amount to Trident is this. In fact, how do we get this? Is that there, Trident receive 1 million, receive this 1 million, sell it at this spot rate, receiving this. And you can see that it's more than what they expected. So enjoy a gain on sale. Enjoy a gain on sale. Right. What if let's say now the pounds here drops, depreciate? Right, if the pounds depreciate in 90 days time, too bad. trader will incur a loss on sale by this much because they are forced to receive lesser in dollar. All right, so there's a change in the exchange rate, and therefore it can be, you know, either one, either they will enjoy a gain on sale or a loss on sale. That's all. Huh? How do we know whether it's a gain on sale or loss on sale? Right, you will see that they are expected to receive pounds. And in the first scenario here, the pounds actually appreciate, and you're going to sell this pound at a higher price, and therefore you will receive higher in your dollar value. And there you enjoy a gain on sale just because of a change in the exchange rate where it's favorable. Your pounds appreciate. You enjoy a gain here. Right. Alternatively, or contrastly, on contrary, if let's say the pounds drop, then let's say the pounds drop, and you're going to receive pounds, and you have to sell these pounds at a lower price. So of course, you will receive lesser in your home currency. So incur a loss on sale by this much. So therefore, you will see that for remain unhedged position, is very uncertain. It's very uncertain. It depends on what is the spot rate then when you have to sell these pounds. When you receive this 1 million pounds, you got to sell it at that prevailing spot rate, and it's not known at the moment. This is what you can see, the essence of an unhedged approach. So today, the trader actually contracted to receive 1 million pounds in 90 days. Right, in 90 days only, they're going to receive this 1 million pounds. So therefore, come 90 days from today, this is what you are going to receive. You will see that your exposure amount will never change. Please follow me on this. Your exposure amount will never change. You ask your customer to pay you in 1 million pounds. Of course, your customer will pay you and you will receive exactly this amount. So your exposure amount will never change. The only concern is how much of this value you will receive in your home currency wise. That is the concern. Right, your exposure amount will never change. How much you got to pay, how much you got to receive at settlement, it will remain. It's the same because you contracted on this amount. The only concern is how much is it worth in your home currency term. Right. If let's say there is no change in the exchange rate, then this is what you receive as of what you expected earlier. But if let's say your pounds appreciate, you will receive more than whatever you expected. So you will enjoy a forex gain here. But if let's say your pounds depreciates, then too bad. You will receive lesser than what you expected. So you incur a loss on sale. All right, so that is the remain unhedged position. Now let's try to look into what if let's say the company decides to go for a forward market hedge using a forward contract. Right, a forward hedge uses definitely a forward contract, and every time when we touch on forward contracts, forward rate must appear. So you're going to engage a forward contract here, lock at a price, we call it the forward rate, to buy or sell the currency. Okay, the exchange rate is agreed upon today. So meaning to say the contract or your forward contract, you're going to enter into today, agreed on the price, agreed on the rate, the forward rate, you're going to buy or sell that currency today. But the actual payment will be made in the future time. But at T0, you have to enter into the forward contract already, locking at that price. So only come in the future time when you do your settlement for this forward contract, that's where you go and buy or sell at this price. All right, that's how forward market hedge work. So to hedge, the strategy is this. It's quite simple. Right? The logic behind is this. To hedge receivables, meaning to say it's a foreign currency receivables, There. This is a receivable. You expect to receive foreign currency in a future time. And when you receive this foreign currency, this is not your currency. Therefore, you would want to sell your foreign currency at that time. So therefore, you will enter into a short forward now to sell that currency. Short forward on that currency. Right. Similarly, the same concept, if you want to hedge the payable in a foreign currency, this is a foreign currency payable. So in fact, you have to pay in foreign currency. That's where you got to buy the foreign currency at time T. So when you need to settle this payable, that's where you got to buy foreign currency at that prevailing rate. But for forward market hedge, that's where we're going to enter into a forward contract here, where you need to buy that foreign currency. So long forward on that currency. Okay, and all this happening at T0, delivering in the future time. Okay, so similar strategies apply for futures market hedge. Same thing, same position when you go for futures. Let's try on Trident case again. Some example, right, and some figures playing. Come. Should Trident engage forward market hedge, it will involve a forward contract or even a futures, either one. You can actually go for both. If let's say they are confident enough, they can go for both. But most of the time, we choose either one only. So it involves a forward contract and a source of funds to fulfill the contract. Definitely, because when you need to buy a currency, you have to sell the other currency. If you want to sell that currency in the forward, then in other words, you are buying another currency. So it's a source of funds to actually fulfill that contract. So given a forward rate today, so T0 today, right? This is known, forward rate is known, and it's between the dollar and pounds. So Trident will sell 1 million pounds forward today. So enter into a contract to lock to sell this 1 million pounds under the forward contract. And the price they lock to sell will be at the forward rate, this one. Okay, so again, I repeat, T0 here, today, Trident will have to sign a contract to sell 1 million pounds forward, meaning involving a forward contract, locked at the price today, which is the forward rate. By entering into the forward market hedge, this transaction is covered, right? Where Trident no longer has any forex risk, honestly, because the price is known, the amount engaged is known. So T0, you know how much you are going to receive in dollar-wise in 90 days time. Okay, so it's known already today how much dollar you're going to receive from this forward, because the value known, the rate known. It's just that the actual delivery will be in 90 days time. Actual settlement will be at 90 days time. But today you know already the value of the dollar you're going to receive in 90 days. Right there, in 90 days, Trident will fulfill the forward contract, and their obligation is to sell pounds. So they have to sell pounds. Right, when 90 days come, the customer, that is the British firm, will pay to Trident. So Trident will receive this amount from the UK firm. And what happened is that, on the other hand, the Trident has a forward contract here to sell. So now is the time to deliver. So they will take this 1 million they receive from the customer, go under the forward here, fulfill this obligation, sell it at the forward rate, and they will receive this amount in dollar 90 days later from the forward. Okay? Yeah, the essence is pretty simple. Under your spot, you contracted to receive 1 million pound in 90 days time. So only in 90 days later, you will receive exactly this amount. Because you ask your customer to pay you 1 million, in pounds. So definitely you're going to receive exactly this amount. There's no change in your exposure amount in foreign currency. That's what I'm saying. There's no change. The only change is that how much of this worth in my currency. In this case, Sweden, that is dollar. But when I involve a forward market, pretty easily, because today, meaning T0 time, I enter into a forward contract to sell this amount, right, at the price that is the forward rate. So come 90 days later, this is a contract. That's where you have to fulfill. You have to fulfill your obligation to sell the 1 million pounds at this price. That's where you have. Okay, so you fulfill your obligation. Sell 1 million pounds, you receive from your customer, go sell it under the forward at the price here, receive. Clear? Okay, right, so that's what we said, that's what we saw from the first slide, or the slide on the forward market hedge, right? Contract, this is a contract involved, and a source of funds, That's where you have to receive from your customer, bring this over to the forward and sell it and receive your home currency. So one hand you receive from customer, the UK firm, take it over to the forward contract here, sell it, and therefore you won't have pounds